hip hop soul in the crowd. Yeah.
All right, back here on the Rob and Stu show, a guy joining us today that I'm actually really excited to talk to, longtime listener, first time caller to him. He is an amazing writer at The Athletic. Finally bringing some class to this show because we got Rob on here, dirty Rutgers fan. You talk about a Spartan. I'm talking about Chris Vannini. Chris, thank you for joining us. And it's great to have some more Spartan blood on this show. I mean, just a quality human being, finally.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Chris, I've been following you for years. I know Rob was telling me he reads your stuff in The Athletic. You know, you're obviously a great follow on Twitter, but for people who haven't been introduced to you, where can they find all your plethora of stuff besides, you know, the archives of M Live?
Yeah, I'm a senior writer for The Athletic, theathletic.com, and I've been there since 2017 after about 5 years with coachingsearch.com. And before that, I was just out of college. So it's been a quick 12 years or so in this business, but it's been fun.
Yeah, and I grew up just reading your stuff just because you were a beat writer for everything I wanted to know. So let's start off, though, because you kind of blossomed away from Michigan and now a national coverage guy. I'm going to take you back to East Lansing for a second. Greatest coach of all time, period, end of story. Nicholas Saban.
There he goes.
The greatest coach of all time. His departure, certainly unexpected. Kalen DeBoer, was it a great hire? We have a friend that's Alabama grad who swears up and down he's watching game film day in, day out, and he says he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. What's your initial take on how this all went down? Was this always the plan? Is this a good hire?
It's hard to say anything is a good hire. You never know what's going to work. I mean, everybody thought Tom Herman to Texas was a home run. Everybody thought, you know, Mark D'Antonio to Michigan State did not seem like the big deal that it turned out to be. You never know for sure. But, you know, Nick Saban, people knew he was going to retire at some point, not far down the road. The AD, Greg Byrne, knew he was going to retire at some point. And so he did. I think it did surprise people, the timing, for sure. And then when he does, you know, you have a handful of coaches who are possibilities, who used to coach at Alabama. Dan Lanning at Oregon, Steve Sarkisian at Texas. Mike Norvell didn't coach there, but he was another coach who was a possibility as well. And very quickly, all three reaffirmed their commitment to where they were for various reasons. And you end up with Kalen DeBoer, who just took a team to the national championship game. You know, that's pretty good. He has like 11 or 12 losses in his career as a coach. His record's 100 something and like 11. It's ridiculous. The guy's won everywhere that he's been. And history has shown that guys who have won everywhere they've been typically win at the next place that they go to. The question will be, can he get the same level of talent into Tuscaloosa that Nick Saban was able to do? Because it's a different world now. Alabama's a bit behind in the NIL game. You don't have players who are maybe taking the Nick Saban discount to come play for the greatest coach of all time, and that kind of changes things. So I think he'll do a good job there. He's always gotten the most out of all his players, but it's a new world now, and he's going to have to battle for it every single day. So I think it was a good hire. Yeah.
This NIL and, you know, the way it's really changed college football now. I mean, you see a team like Ohio State. I mean, they're already top 3, top 4 in recruiting every year, no matter. But now, you know, the way Michigan surpassed them the last 2 or 3 years, it seems like their fan base and their alumni can't take it. So they went absolutely wild this year in the NIL. Is it crazy to you that a school like Ohio State can come in and just take away from a school like Alabama? Or with this NIL, this is the way college football is going to be. It's just who has the biggest money every year is going to come in and take who they want.
Well, I mean, like you said, I mean, Ohio State always has top 5 recruiting classes. Alabama always has top 5 recruiting classes. it's still generally been the same number of teams at the top. What is different is the transfer portal and the guys that become available. I think where NIL has a greater impact is not in recruiting, it's in keeping your guys. Most notable about Ohio State is that they have had a lot of NFL quality players decide to come back this year. Michigan had the same thing last year. Washington had the same thing last year. And if you can convince a guy to stay in school for a pretty big paycheck and a guy who might be a day 2 or day 3 pick, then it makes your team better, makes college football better. That is what we've seen. I mean, Michigan and Washington, they just played for the national championship. They were full of 6-year guys, 5th-year guys who could have gone pro and decided to come back. That's not a coincidence. And that is what Ohio State is doing this year. Yes, it's good to get Caleb Downs. He's an amazing player and a lot of other things. But to me, the bigger story is the players that Ohio State is keeping, the ones we thought were going to go pro and are not. That is going to be the thing that makes Ohio State a national championship contender again.
Are you
Rob
a
brought
fan
him
of
up.
this NIL, or are you more traditional? Like, do you think the NCAA at a certain point is going to say, like, I thought Chip Kelly made some good points like a month or two ago when he was on with somebody. He's like, to me, it should be a revenue sharing type thing where they all get a piece of the pie and they all get a certain amount of money. It's just I feel like in college football, the fans, there's a split between the older fans who really can't take these kind of players making that kind of money and the younger fans like me or Stu or that like don't really have an issue with the NIL, but I feel like there's a
I
fight
wouldn't say I
between
don't
fans.
have an issue with the NIL. I
Well,
certainly have
yeah, I
an
mean,
issue with it, but
yeah.
I mean, Chris, is it ever going to get regulated?
Yes, it will. 5 years or so, it's going to have to because the system is going to change. Either the courts are going to make a change and they're going to become employees, or the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is going to make them employees, or the NCAA's wish for Congress to help them out with something is going to be. We're in just kind of a weird middle ground right now, and it's not going to be the long term. This is what it's always going to be. It's not going to be this.
Mhm.
What I think the NIL and the transfer stuff, they overlapped and they're separate things. I don't think it'd be as nearly as big a deal to a lot of people if players were getting a lot of money and they were sticking around. I think it's when you see a player leave and get money to go somewhere else, that's the kind of thing that can turn a lot of fans just kind of sour on what they felt like college football was. Because the thing about college football, college sports was that, you watch the kid grow for 4 years and then he goes off and does whatever, and you get connected to those players. And if guys are transferring every single year, I think that is kind of the bigger thing that's concerning to fans. But look, this is the world we live in because the NCAA was so staunchly against giving anything to the players for so long that eventually courts and governments took notice. When you have coaches making $10 million a year, it's very, very hard to say, oh, the players are getting a scholarship. That's enough. No, it's not. And I always come back to the video game, the NCAA football video game about a decade ago when they stopped it. And Ed O'Bannon had the lawsuit about
War
getting paid
criminal.
to be in the video game. And Ed O'Bannon didn't want the video game to go away. And EA Sports was saying, we'll pay the players. The NCAA said no. And that started the process of everything getting to where we are. If the NCAA had just let the players have their video game money, and if they had just done some revenue sharing with the TV stuff and stuff like that, I don't think a lot of what we have now would have happened. It's just they pushed against it for so hard they wouldn't budge in it. Instead, eventually the California state legislature decides to make NIL a thing. And then the state governments get involved everywhere. The lawsuits come, and here we are. So if a decade ago they just let the players have some money and kind of start it there, I don't think it would have gotten as out of control, or at least as crazy as it is now.
Speaking of out of control, there's a school that you're familiar with. It's a war criminal school. They support Russian separatists in the Donbass. Some are saying they won the national championship allegedly this year. Those Wolverines. First of all, Harbaugh finally leaves after his 15th. I'm staying, I'm not, I'm going, I'm interviewing, but I'm staying type thing. He leaves. Moore takes over. But yeah, we still got this thing that everybody forgot, Stallions on the sidelines with the Ray-Bans, with the camera. Like, where do you see this thing going? Because you look at their schedule next year, is Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, and that's not great. That's not great. Not to mention, their schedule does set up for, if they're playing anybody that's kind of sneaky, like the Spartans, this could be a 4-loss team next year.
Yeah, I think that's the case for a lot of teams in the Big Ten. All of those schedules are getting tougher because you're adding USC, Oregon, and Washington to the conference. And not only is Michigan's schedule harder, not only are they going to have to replace a lot of the coaching staff, but they're going to have to replace a lot of the players. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be. They got some really key pieces coming back, but they're losing a ton off of that team because a lot of those guys had come back to do what they did. So, yeah, could be 2-3 loss team, but 2-3 loss team could get you in the playoff moving forward. That's the other thing we kind of have to adjust to as fans, is that losing 1 or 2 games doesn't end your season. And if you look at the schedule and say, man, we might be a 9-3 team, well, if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, 9-3 might get you in. And so that's kind of another part of the adjustment to be made. But yeah, it's going to be a step back for Michigan, which is normal, which is accepted, which is what happens when you don't recruit at a top 5 level every year, which they don't. And so you got to develop guys over a couple of years. And that's the process that's going to have to start over now.
Do you see a big drop off with him leaving? Obviously, they're going to lose a lot of players this year. I'm talking 2-3 years down the line. You think it really starts to show with him gone?
Well, look, Jim Harbaugh is one of the greatest coaches of this generation. He nearly won a Super Bowl, and he took Michigan, a team, to the national championship that nobody thought could happen. So he's always won as a coach everywhere he's been. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, to a lesser extent, or to a greater extent, with Nick Saban. Kalen DeBoer's standard that he's walking into is you have to win the national championship every year. And that's impossible to live up to. Michigan's standard is not as high. I don't think the standard will be as high for Sharon Moore. I don't think he comes in with a fan base saying, you have to win the Big Ten, you have to win the national championship this year. They want to compete to win the Big Ten and make the playoff. That's going to be their goals next year. So what I am curious about is how the recruiting goes. Does it get better with Sharon Moore? Does he put together a staff that does that in a different way? Does Michigan take the momentum of the national championship, the NIL part, and all this stuff, and step it up? Because for the last 3 years, all of Michigan's recruiting has had to have a conversation with a kid. Hey, is Jim Harbaugh going to be here next year? You never knew that. Now Sharon Moore is going to be there. That could keep the door open for more players than it did otherwise. So he's still putting together the staff, and it's going to take a little bit. But that's the first thing I'm going to be curious about before he coaches a game, is how do things look like for Michigan on the recruiting trail throughout the spring and into the summer?
Well, it's good for Harbaugh because a lot of rumors I hear was he was definitely afraid of Greg Schiano and the Rutgers team that's coming next year. That's why he went to the Chargers. That's what I heard. I didn't. I saw the rumor. I didn't. Stu, you've seen the same.
Can't prove it now, right?
Yeah, I read it on Twitter, so it's good.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Chris, Michigan State gets Jonathan Smith. Great coaching hire. Keep him away from an iPhone, but great coach from Oregon State coming over. He has done something really interesting for folks that have been watching the program for the last few years, how he's approached the transfer portal, like you brought up. What are your initial impressions? We're about 2 months into him on the job, seeing him recruit, seeing him attack the portal. Obviously, Naden Childs, I'm extremely excited to see him play. We haven't had a running quarterback since Drew Stanton. And this guy probably is way better than Drew, right? What's your thoughts?
Drew Stanton was pretty good, so.
He was a great running quarterback. He was. This guy, Aiden looks a little bit more electric, but I don't know. That may just be body type build. I don't know.
Yeah, and he's only played a handful of games. I mean, you got to wait and see, but the ceiling is obviously high. I think Jonathan Smith has done what he's needed to do. I think he's done what you would expect at this point. There's a lot of roster turnover. Notably, he was able to keep a lot of guys who had entered the portal, get them back. I think that's as important as anything else. And you just start the building process. He didn't turn Oregon State around in one season. It took 3 or 4 years before he kind of got everything in place. I went up and visited him at Oregon State a year or two ago, and he is the most normal, one of the most normal dudes I've ever met who just happens to be a football coach. Most football coaches are crazy. Like you usually don't get into that profession unless you're just like an animal all about this stuff. Jonathan Smith is always just steady, level-headed. He asked me about books I was reading, had questions for me. It was a very interesting conversation. And that's exactly what Michigan State needed. I mean, things were just out of control there. And they needed someone to just get things back to a steady pace level, understand where you are, try to overachieve. I think with Mel Tucker and the contract they gave him, people thought, man, we could be at the Big Ten's elite level here. We're paying a coach like SEC schools are. That's the new goal. Well, no, the infrastructure is not in place to be like that. The infrastructure is to be like what Mark D'Antonio was, which is compete for the Big Ten, every couple of years, make a bowl game every year and build up over time and have a breakthrough couple of seasons. I mean, that's what he did at Oregon State. That is what Michigan State historically has been. And the number one thing I'm looking forward to with him is not Aiden Childs and the quarterback. It's the offensive line. That is something that had really fallen off the last number of years. I've talked to some people around the program. The offensive line coach that they hired, Jim, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
I think Mahalik.
Might be that.
Yeah.
I've heard nothing but great things about him. I've always heard he's one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. That's where everything has to start for Michigan State. That's where it always has had to start for Michigan State. So you look at what Michigan did this year. You look at what the Detroit Lions did this year. It's all about the offensive line. That's where it starts. And I think that's where Jonathan Smith is going to start. And I think that's a positive sign as his era starts in East Lansing.
Roberto, I know you got a question coming up. I just want to ask this for just wiki curiosity. Is there ever going to be a retrospective on the Mel Tucker years? Because I feel like looking back, he was only there for 2.5 years, maybe not even a full 3. Came in at like just a weird time. Kenneth Walker comes in on January 6th, right? Buried the lead, and then we all the stuff that transpired, the whole brand thing. Do you think there's ever going to be like one of those like John U. Bacon-esque Rich Rodriguez, this is what happened in the background type exposés, or do you think we're just going to let a sleeping dog lie?
I mean, I don't think it's going to be a book, but I mean, I wrote one of those about a week or so before Jonathan Smith got hired. I wrote a story on what went wrong. And, a former staffer I talked to said that he joked that he's like, Kenneth Walker should have gotten half that contract that Mel Tucker got, because that really covered up a lot of things. It raised the expectations to a level that they shouldn't have been at yet. And Mel Tucker bought that all in. He hires PR companies to help run his brand. He's doing all these different fashion things. And some people in the program said, no, that's just how Mel's always been. Some people in the program said, you could tell it really went to his head. Other people said, hey, he was sleeping in the office all the time anyway because he was working. Some people said he was way too obsessed with social media and what people were saying on Twitter and getting various narratives out there. And, he had changed some things going into this past year, but then the allegations and everything to come out, and it blew it up. He had a chief of staff with him when he got there who'd been with him for a long time, and that guy left. The guy who replaced him, or a couple of guys who replaced him, didn't kind of have the same connection. The recruiting was off in a way where they were offering way too many guys they had no chance with. and then didn't really have as many plan Bs. And yeah, the recruiting went up, but it should have gone up higher than it did. So not to toot my own horn or plug myself, but there's this story again. It's kind of late November-ish, right around Thanksgiving. I did it basically what went wrong under Mel Tucker and what does Michigan State need to get back. And the characteristics that I laid out, steady hand and all that kind of stuff, turned out to be exactly what Jonathan Smith was.
Roberto.
All right, I got to ask you. I got to ask you one question here. I'm a Rutgers guy. This is the first year Shiano has finally got them back to being respectable. Took them a few seasons. Very good defense. Their offense was horrific outside of the running back. You have any Rutgers points? Any thoughts on them? Starting to get a little bit better in the Big Ten. Shiano, like you said, almost to the point you made with Michigan State. For a Rutgers fan, the biggest thing is, can we make a bowl every year and just be respectable in the Big Ten?
Hey, Chris, mind you, you're talking to one of the 7 season ticket holders for Rutgers football. Okay.
Look, I've got a Rutgers, I don't know about take, but something that jumped out to me that I wanted to write about, but Rutgers didn't want to talk to me about. Greg Schiano got a giant contract at mid-December. His salary went up to $6.25 million to start. I think it was at like 3 something.
Yeah, something
for
around
that. And to that point, he did not yet have a winning record in that entire second stint. That salary would have ranked 3rd in the ACC or the Pac-12, which just goes to show you just how much different the Big Ten and SEC money is.
Yeah.
It's just going to be at a different level for these conferences. But I didn't think Schiano needed that much of a raise for a school that has had financial issues. I mean, he's not going anywhere, I don't think. It was just a surprisingly huge raise for a guy who's like been like okay in his second stint. And look, they had a good finish. The win over Miami was great. But man, that's a lot of money for a guy who settled things down. He's got things back in order, but he's not blowing the socks off you.
Yeah, the thing with us is, he's the only coach to really ever have success there in the last 40 or so years. You know what I mean? So as a fan, in New Jersey, everything is pro sports, right? So up north, you're either Giants or Jets. And south, you're a Philadelphia fan like me. So it's very pro teams. College always takes a back seat. He's the only one that's ever really had the success there. So everybody just, what he says goes, right? Everybody trusts him. He makes them respectable. And I think that's why you see him, he gets the money like that, because it was a disaster with Chris Ash. Kyle Flood, I mean, he didn't do a horrible job, but it really fell apart at the end with Flood. And with Chris Ash, forget about it. Everybody, the 78-0 to Michigan, I mean, just the most embarrassing losses you've ever seen. So
Kenneth Walker,
to his credit, exactly. Like Rutgers has gone from getting just absolutely demolished in those Michigan-Ohio State games to being competitive for a half or 3/4 against those teams.
Yeah.
Which is a notable improvement. It just felt like a lot of money for a guy who's not going to win the Big Ten.
No, it is.
Probably not going to make the playoff. I mean, that salary gets up to $7 million or so pretty quickly. I reached out to Rutgers and I just said wanted to talk to the AD to write something about kind of why he got such a big raise, but they didn't want to talk about it. So is what it is.
We might have to call Dave. We might have to get Dave.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. If you ever met the crew that we tailgate with at Rutgers games, and Stu's come up for a
mental
game,
patience, Chris.
Yeah,
mental
patience. It's tough scenes.
Really need help. Let's go some lightning round questions as we wind it down here. Just going to pepper you with some college football questions. Just first thought that comes to mind. I'm going to mix in a little wrestling questions in here too, because like myself, you enjoyed the great sport that is wrestling. Rob wouldn't know. He doesn't know.
No.
I mentioned I was front row for AEW when they came to DC, and he said, "Oh, you watching all that? You bringing the baby oil for the guys, all that stuff." So it was really tough. Let's start off with Group of 5: best hire, worst hire, worst situation, best situation that just immediately jump to mind, which, mind you, in The Athletic, you did write-ups for each job, whether it was Buffalo, San Jose State, whoever, you're doing a full write-up for them, and those are available. Best and worst hire, either situation or the fit just doesn't seem right, or what have you.
Best, I'm gonna go with Tulane hiring John Summerall from Troy. He has won 2 conference championships in 2 years. John Summerall did at Troy, turned that place around really quickly. That guy seems like he's destined to be a SEC head coach very quickly. And Tulane losing Willie Fritz, there was wonder, they lost the AD, Troy Dannon to Washington. You lose Willie Fritz to Houston. Is there going to be that commitment? Is that going to continue? Are they going to build that bubble practice facility, or is it going to be like 1998 where they have the big season and then things kind of fall by the wayside? Hiring John Summerall, I think, was a huge hire. I think that's an absolutely tremendous hire for them. It's going to keep the momentum for what they are doing. In terms of worst hire at the Group of 5 level, it's here's another best, one of the better ones, I think. New Mexico hiring Bronco Mendenhall.
Yeah.
Who, again, a guy who's won everywhere he's been, another guy who's just like very solid, consistent at a program that's been down for a very long time. I think that was a steal by New Mexico to get Bronco Mendenhall. He's a guy I could have seen go to Washington or something like that. So for New Mexico to have him, very, very strong. And then let's go. I'm very uncertain about Jared Parker at Troy, a guy who's kind of been around all over the place, has a bit of a different background than John Summerall, although the two are, I think they're friends or play together or something like that. But he's a guy who's coached at Duke, Notre Dame, Purdue, like a lot of different places. And I'm curious how that will go at Troy, a place that has a lot of support, place that, again, has won a lot the last couple of years. I think that's maybe the G5 hire that I have the most questions about. Not to say that it won't work, but I do have some questions.
For wrestling, right now, which product are you enjoying more? Is it AEW? Is it WWE? Or is it like something weird like, GCW or something?
It's been WWE since Triple H took over the book about a year and a half ago or so. Product just got so much better. The storylines made sense. The characters are better. Everybody's over right now, man. Like everybody feels like a big deal in that company, and that's where it's really exciting. Raw 3 hours long on Monday nights used to feel like a slog. It used to feel like a chore to get through it. Now it's just a good show. Almost every segment's really good stuff. They got more people over than they've ever been. AEW is obviously in a bit of a lull right now. It's been a tough year or so for them. They've been through my part of Texas a number of times. I've been there 4 or 5 times. I went up to the show in Detroit as well. They got a lot that I like. They just kind of are missing a lot of those big pieces right now compared to where they were, coming out of the pandemic. They were great. They were hot. They were a lot of stars, but they just haven't found the consistency. People will get a big moment and then they'll kind of fall off and there's no plan afterward. Hangman Page wins the title and then kind of just has a whatever run, and he's kind of done nothing since then. They got to, moment to moment, they haven't been able to string those things together, and I think that's what's missing is that continued storytelling.
We'll flip-flop back again. Miami, the U. We have a friend, Paul Scoop, on the U. He's deranged. God bless him. But is Miami going to make the playoff this year? I'm not a crystal ball guy. I'm not sold. I mean, he can build a program, but I'm not sure he can coach. I think Roberto has agreed with me on that. In Miami, those guys are starting to get really anxious of how come it's not working yet. We've got 17 platinum stars out there. What's going on? We're losing to Rutgers. Some are saying it might have ruined the program.
Yeah, look, I mean, there were a lot of questions from people I talked to who know football about that hire of Mario Cristobal, and why does he continually coach them out of some games? Why has he not been able to develop a quarterback? He inherited Justin Herbert. But when you're able to get somebody like Cam Ward out of the portal, who's developed, who was going to go to the NFL, that's a very big, important piece. This is a big year for Cristobal in Miami. It has been a rough 2 years. This is not what was promised when he came home. And all the money that went into that, all the money that Miami had never been spending on football before, now they are, in coaching salaries and buyouts and NIL and all these types of things. They're doing the things that Miami historically has not done. But it hasn't come together yet through 2 years. And they got another good influx of transfer kids. Cam Ward's a really good quarterback. You got to make it happen this year. I'm not saying make the playoff, but like, you got to be like easily 8-9 win territory and showing some major progress, because it's been a not so great couple of years for a place that fired Manny Diaz because he won, but he didn't win enough.
That's what I said. Last question before we let you
Well,
go.
one last one.
Oh,
One last
go ahead.
one for me. Riley Leonard. I really love the move for Notre Dame. I kind of like Notre Dame as a future in the college football championship betting. What do you think of Riley Leonard going to Notre Dame?
Well, there was just news today, I think, that he's out like 6 to 8 weeks, injury
with
or
his
surgery or
toe,
something like that. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. He didn't have as good of a season this past year as people expected. And obviously ended up getting hurt later on, but he came into the year as NFL type of guy. People thought he didn't really have that year.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Notre Dame's another place. Marcus Freeman, year 3, you got to have a better season. I mean, they haven't been down like Miami's been down, but haven't been at the level that they were under Brian Kelly for the last couple of years. You get Sam Hartman, you have a pretty good year. You get Riley Leonard, can you have a better year? So the thing about the 12-team playoff, though, is that it will immensely help teams like Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
That was why the compromise of the 12-team playoff was such a big deal, because you have to be a conference champion to get a bye. So Notre Dame's never going to get that bye. But a 12-team field means a 2-loss Notre Dame, for sure a 1-loss, is going to get in every year. So that's going to help their chances as well. Good team, solid team. We'll see if the quarterback plays a little bit better, because Sam Hartman started really strong last year, and then he threw all those interceptions that people kind of had seen before. So we'll see.
Last question, Chris. I'm giving you the book for AEW and WWE. You get to make one thing. Hey, what? You let us talk about real sports, okay?
Okay.
AEW, WWE, you get to make one change for each. What is it?
Well, I mean, I can't make.
Or you can book whatever you want. I'm just giving you.
For AEW, it'd have all your guys be healthy again. I mean, they've had some really crap luck. I mean, I'll tell you, one of my AEW predictions coming into the year was that Adam Cole becomes the world champion, which I think was originally the plan before he got hurt. That is something that needs to happen. That is something I think that will happen. MJF comes back, presumably. You got a red hot thing right there at the top of the card. That's what you.
I have 15 more questions for you, but I'm not going to take up all night.
WWE,
a lot of issues this week.
I think you put the world heavyweight title, and I think it may happen on Drew McIntyre. He has been just killing it last couple of months. A guy who's had a great story, and now he'll probably will go up against Seth Rollins for that belt at WrestleMania Night 1, probably. He's been great. I think I would say Cody over Roman, but I think that's obvious. I think we think all that's going to happen. That needs to happen. Really needs to be freshened up at the top. I think it will be. But if there was something else that isn't obvious, I think I'd have Drew McIntyre take that other title.
Beautiful. Chris, I can't thank you enough. I love reading your stuff. It's great to have a fellow Spartan on the program. Once again, where can people read your material and check out and get smart about life?
Yeah, just theathletic.com for everything we got going on there. And then I'm at Chris Vannini on pretty much every social platform there is.
I'm gonna have to get you. You know what? I'm gonna ask you back on, and we're just gonna nerd about wrestling before WrestleMania.
Oh, that's the other thing. Oh, by the way, the Getting Over Wrestling podcast. I do a wrestling podcast with Adam Silverstein at CBS Sports. We're actually nominated for Best Wrestling Podcast. So if you are a wrestling fan who heard this talk at the end and wanted more of that, check us out there, the Getting Over Wrestling podcast.
I love it. And maybe I'll get Alex Marvez on, and we'll convert you back to AEW.
Yeah, no, I like them both, man. I like AEW, WWE. It's good for everybody when you got.
Oh yeah, it's actually enjoyable. But anyway, thank you again, Chris. Roberto,
Thanks, man.
thank you for staying awake. I know you got to wake up at 4. Until next time, take care, brush your hair. We'll see you next time. Episode 300. Stay tuned, folks. Later.